I'm Mike Kelzer. Growing up in my family's pharmacy, life moved fast. There was always something to do, someone to help. But the moments that meant the most to me as I think back were the conversations my dad and I would have about business and life itself. We'd get so absorbed. We'd talk for an hour and it would seem like 15 minutes. This podcast is my way of keeping those memories alive. There's no scripts, no outlines, no fluff, no hidden agendas. It's just real honest talk about the business of pharmacy and sometimes a little more. Let's dive in. Randy, introduce yourself to our listeners.
I'm Randall Lipps. I'm Chairman, CEO, and founder of Omnicell. We make medication management systems to help make it easier for clinicians and patients get their meds.
Randy, we were talking before we got on here. I know that you're jumping over the whole USA last week, and I'm thinking that's probably customary for you.
I have a real big heart for the folks who are on the front lines trying to deal with the pressures of healthcare, right? I just noticed the other day that CMS, the big government who pays all the bills for Medicare and Medicaid, are reducing their rates, which means everyone has to figure out how to do more with less. There's always that constant pressure in healthcare, whether it's nurses, pharmacists, or doctors, to figure out how to do more with less. So you got to go out and feel that pain. And there's nothing like finding out from what's going on in the front line to find out what the truth is.
All right, so Randy, give our listeners a taste of what Omnicell is. It's robotics and machinery to take away some of the mundane tasks that maybe robots and computers can do better than we can. It allows pharmacists, technicians, and the like to use their people skills and thinking skills to help out the pharmacy world, but not be tied down to some of the more mundane things and things that we can make more mistakes on than a robot can when we got a million things we're juggling.
Medications make this huge difference in whether people are going to get healed or not. If they get the meds and take the meds right, it's the right med prescribed, then good things happen. But there's a lot in the way of getting meds to the patient so that it works with perfection, so you get the best outcome. So how can we take software, hardware, robotics, and a bunch of other things, and take the burden of getting those medications to that patient when they need them in the form they need to take them? So it sounds easy, but it's really hard, particularly if a patient's in a hospital, for instance. 30% of their meds change every day. And so you've got to be prepared to have those meds available. In a hospital, there's like 3,000 SKUs. Any patient in that hospital could need one of 3,000 SKUs at any moment. How are you going to make sure those are readily available for the doctors, the clinicians, the nurses, and then for people at home? How do you make sure that you get those meds prescribed right, picked up right, and taken correctly, which also is sometimes a challenge?
My listeners hear me saying this all the time, but I know people can get worried. On the left side, you got robotics taking away some of the physical stuff from pharmacists. Then on the right side, you got AI. You and I growing up always thought that the computers were going to come into the blue collar, all robots and stuff. And now here it comes down on the white collars. But I always say, look, if we wake up tomorrow and the robots and the AI have cured cancer, cured obesity, made compliance 100%, and made us live to 100, well, then maybe humans would have something to worry about. With the robots and AI, we might increase our lifespan from, what are we men, 78 up to 79. It's like humans, don't worry, there's plenty for us. Let things do things to give us time to do what we do best.
I like to think about it like this. I mean, you're a pharmacist, you're one of these smart guys on the planet. I'm not sure I could have even gotten into pharmacy school, trust me, so I went into engineering and stuff. But you go through all these years. Mike, what did you do? 7 years of schooling?
I goofed around a little bit. Back in my day, Randy, it was 5. My dad was 4, but now it's 6 or 7.
6, and what are you doing? You're studying science and math and could I say they're a little bit nerdy? These are not your basic basket weaving classes. They're tough classes. And so you come out all prepared to hit the world of clinical pharmacy, and your first job is like, oh, gee, we've got a shortage. Where are these drugs on the shelves? Are they out in the hospital floors? Or they don't have much to do with that clinical training that you geared up for. So I like to think Omnicell is doing all of that work behind the scenes so that pharmacists can get out of the hospital basement or from behind the counter at the retail establishment so they can engage with patients, because that's where behavior modification comes. You know, we all talk about how the pharmacist is the most trusted healthcare person on the planet. Take that beautiful asset and get them engaged with the patient. And what do you get? You get understanding, you get influence in getting that patient to take the med the right way. Just because you give me this long thing at the pharmacy that says these are all the things you should do with your drug, it's probably not going to happen as much as if, Mike, you're out there saying, let me come around to the counter and explain to you how this drug really works, and this will help you get better. But you got to follow the instructions. You got to be in the game on how this works. But you can't come around the counter because you're back there doing mundane things, writing reports, tracking down what shelf is low on this, what shelf is low on that. If that was just all automated and you had everything you needed, then you could be freed up. My thought is, how can Omnicell free up these very powerful, very smart clinicians and get them engaged in a way that said, I don't know, what do we call that, top of the license? I hear that a lot. To me, it just means you're taking all of that clinical study and work and you're applying it full force where it needs to be, which is probably either with clinical staff or with the patient.
Randy, you said it gets the pharmacist out, but it got me thinking. I had come back into the pharmacy. I was away for a few years. I just wasn't in very much. And I finally came back around COVID, just serendipitously during COVID. I used to read a lot of management books and things like that up until I got 40. Then I said, now the world's going to hear from me. I read enough of that.
Yeah.
So I get in the pharmacy, and one of my pharmacists is talking to a patient, and it's getting a little bit loud. They're talking about insurance or something like that. They're going at it a little bit. Me being the genius businessman I am, I thought, you know what? I've got to get on the side of the patient, because our pharmacist is 10 feet away and he's getting a little bit hot. That was his personality. It wasn't a favorite trait I liked in him. I said, he's getting hot. She's getting hot. I'm going to do what all the books say and get on her side, physically get on her side. So I walk over there and we're standing there, both facing the counter. I'm side by side with her. I'm going to show him how this is done. I'm talking to her and she says, "Get away from me." So I'd rather have the robots go and talk to her too. But no, I know what you mean. You got to let pharmacists go at the top of their license, as you say.
And you got to get rid of those copays. That's the only thing she was arguing about. I'm sure it was about some copay that she shouldn't be paying. And,
yeah, that's
and
right.
You were supposed to explain her insurance program to her. It had nothing to do with medications, but
no, it wasn't medicine. It was everything else people are hot about. Randy, all right, so 10 years into this or so, this baby of yours, Omnicell goes public. Tell me about that, and tell me about your emotions. I know if we were talking right now, you'd have to say, Mike, everything's perfect. I love the investors, and they're my favorite people and all that stuff. But now that we're like 20 years out, tell me your emotions. Was it hard? Was everything great? Was it hard to have, a boss now in the investors? How did it go down, and how did you feel about it?
That's a great question. People think that you're just so excited to go public for some reason, that there's some value that's placed on the company all of a sudden. You think your paper is worth a lot. But what happened to me was, in the first 10 years, I had to go out and ask for money and get investors in all the time. So I was just pitching all the time. I had to spend half my time with the customers. Then I had to go pitch money all the time. I think I got to raise $83 million before we went public. And what I felt when we finally went public, it was just a big relief that I didn't have to go out and pitch people again about how if they gave me invested in my company, would get to the next milestone. Or like, and you still have to deliver for shareholders, but that took up so much time. And then when you're finally public, you've got different kinds of shareholders, many shareholders. It could be anybody. It could be in or out. But it wasn't that constant money going out, campaign almost. And I was just so glad I didn't have to do that anymore. So glad. And then there are other different pressures when you go public, but it's not the same. When you finally get public, then it means you probably had to be profitable, which we were. Probably means you had to be cash flow positive, which we finally were. So we just put the money in the bank, and I just looked at it and said, geez, I don't have to ask for any more money.
You had to ask people for money. That tends to lean towards more personal conversations, emails. And it seems like public, they're a little bit more faceless. I would like that better if there was rocky times in the business, instead of looking at my aunt and these people I know.
Exactly.
I'd rather have this faceless stockholder maybe mad at me, but it's kind of a nebulous thing versus having to have this personal relationship, feel the pressure. Was there any of that in there?
Well, absolutely, because a lot of things happen as a healthcare company. Even today, 35 to 40% of our shareholders are index funds. Those are faceless. I think you want your stock to perform based on your performance, but you can't always be great. There's capital cycles in healthcare and people can't spend as much money, so the stock kind of follows that. It's nice not to disappoint people personally, but it's also good to give them hope that eventually people need to update their systems or move forward and buy the new technology because it's going to help them out a lot. And kind of strangely, in a way, I have been, public CEO for 20 plus years. There aren't many CEOs that are CEOs for, that long. Most CEOs last about 5-10 years. So been around a long time, and not that you get used to it ever, but that I've seen about everything. I've seen the ups, the downs, the sideways, the good economies, the bad economies, good healthcare, bad healthcare, new administrations, old administrations.
How does it change the dynamics of the boardroom once something goes public? Because the way I understand it, if you own everything, you might have a board, but they're just kind of a recommending board. Then if you have a board of private investors, they've got money in there, and I suppose they have some power, and you're sort of answering to them. And then going public is a whole new situation, but I don't quite understand that. The day you went public, was there a different relationship by necessity or just emotionally you had with your board, or does that kind of stay the same?
Oh, well, that's a good question. Originally, when you went public, you had the same board members mostly. Sometimes you change out a board member right before you went public, but these were generally the large shareholders who had invested in you. But over time, those shareholders, those board members are replaced by what I'd call more interested board members who don't necessarily own a lot of shares, but as representatives for shareholders to act on their interest. It's a different dynamic when somebody owns 10% of the company is on the board and just somebody who's representing the shareholders at large. So there is a little difference there, but they feel very responsible and dutiful and fiscally responsible to help execute what they think the shareholders would want you to do. But the thing is, you have to remember there are all types of shareholders. There's shareholders who are short-term. There's shareholders who are super long-term. Over time, those kinds of shareholders come in and out of the company. What does the shareholder want? It depends on what group of shareholders you ask. In good times, there's always shareholders to be had. In bad times, there's always different kinds of shareholders that you think, well, they want to get involved because they want to ride out the rough days and get to better days. I think the markets are efficient. I think there's a lot of good sides to being public. And I certainly, I've enjoyed the 20 years of all those dynamics. It's been good.
How many are on the board?
Generally, there's somewhere around 8 to 10 people on the board at one time. Usually you have 3 committees, and each committee you'd like to have 3 board members on it each. So it would be at least 9. And then most of those directors had to be independent, they would call it. So like I couldn't serve on the audit committee because I'm running the company. You need somebody who's not on the audit committee or is a representative and has some financial understanding to be on the audit committee. So you're able to get different people on and off the board.
How granular do they get in the business? Is it all financial? Are they talking about what the next machine you should come out with? How granular is that board getting with you?
Well, I think they want you to come up with a strategy and show you how to execute the strategy. If they have questions about the strategy or how things are executing, certainly they'll ask you to get more detailed questions. I don't think they really are driving the strategy. Even if they had some question about the strategy, they'd say, hey, why don't you go out and get a consultant and help you think through the strategy or with all of us to help us get clarity on it. Because I think you got to be careful because, you have 9 board members, you'd have 9 different strategies probably, which would be hard.
My brother owns a branding firm out in California. These companies hire him to go in and, set some strategy and marketing and stuff. And I said, Tim, why the hell are they hiring you? Don't these people, the CMO and the CTO and all this kind of stuff, it seems like they were hired, they could think of this stuff. And about all I came up with is that sometimes they hire the consultants in just so they have someone to blame. Someone would say to Charlie, the CMO, it's like, hey, Charlie, this isn't going so well. And Charlie's like, I shouldn't have hired Tim. I made one mistake. I hired Tim. I'll hire another consultant next time. So I don't know. I find that funny. In my head, it's passing the buck a little bit.
Well, it always sounds better when you say, I had this idea, but I checked it out with the consultants and they agreed with me. So it's got to be a great idea. We paid them a lot of money, so they really got to be good. I mean, if you didn't pay them much money, they wouldn't be very good. If you pay them a lot of money, it has to be a great idea.
Years ago, I was in a service group, a community service group. We met like every Tuesday or something for lunch, and we had speakers every week. Right. And they said that once a month, they had to bring somebody in. Doesn't matter who the hell it was, but they had to bring somebody in from over 100 miles away. If you're Joe down the street, you're not as special as Joe from 101 miles down the way.
Well, it works that one way in healthcare, too. The referring physician, the further away they are, they must be the better one because they're further away. So
yeah, exactly.
Isn't that strange? It's strange about us all. That's the way we think. I mean, the person next door can't be that good, but the person down must be much, much better. Must be the way we're made or something. Why do we think that way?
How much of that does go back evolutionary to, like, I don't know, bringing someone into the tribe who knows maybe a different plant source for medicine or something like that? There must be something there that makes the distance special.
Well, yeah, but blacks are a little bit different on the other side of the river, so there must be special oils in there that you can't get anywhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
There's got to be an edge somewhere to it. You got to find the new edge.
I was watching a movie last night with my wife, a rom-com, and I actually recommended it. So there's some bonus points for me.
Oh, go for it.
How about that? Anyways, it was called The Book Club. And in the book club, there was a bunch of old ladies. We know some of them at our age. Jane Fonda and Candace Bergman. I forget the other ones. The one lady was sitting on a plane with this guy. She finds out later that he's a pilot. It's that distance, it's that guy that flies in from states away or country away. There's just something mysterious about him. Anyways, looking at your history, I know that you were kind of in the American airline something or other. Did you bring anything from that into this business?
Well, what a question. Omnicell started when I had my 5th child at the NICU in UCSF, San Francisco. There she was, half a day born, sitting in the NICU. Nobody knew what was wrong with her. I just sat there for about 3 weeks till she finally got better. What shocked me was she had a dedicated nurse. I knew all the nurses, and then the nurses would come in and say, I got to go get some drug or I got to go get something. And I said, wait a minute. Susie was on the previous shift. I'll show you where she found something. I was the logistics guy for these nurses because they all had private stashes for stuff because there was no organized way to bring this stuff about. Because, I wanted to take good care of my daughter. I said, I'll go get it for you. Take care of the kid.
That's right.
And so when I worked at the airline, we had a bunch of paper. And our job, I was at 8 years at the airline, and I worked at American. And people said, what did you do for the first, after you graduated college? I said, well, I graduated college, went to work for American. It was a nonprofit organization. I just didn't know it, but it was a nonprofit, but never made any money.
Exactly.
The one thing that we were going to do was get rid of the paper. We had paper boarding passes, paper everywhere. So we automated everything, digitized everything to get rid of the paper to lower our cost so that we could capture the data and understand what was going on. So I worked on that my whole, first 7-8 years. I was an industrial engineer. And then I went to work for another travel company in California. And this is when Sarah got in the NICU. I walk in this NICU and every little thing that happened to Sarah, my daughter, they would take out a sheet of paper, write something on it, and put it in the notebook. The notebook had to be 300 pages long. And I'm going, this is the best university hospital in California for kids, and this is the best you got. And they had all sorts of high-tech stuff hooked up to her, but everything was on paper. And I said, there's got to be an arbitrage here somewhere. So I just went after the supply chain and pharmacy stuff that just seemed to be easy for me because you think about an airline plane, it has to have all its parts in the right place or it can't fly. If something's broken, you got to have a part to fix it. If you don't have that part ready, that's a $100 million asset sitting there on the ground, and it may be only a $25 part. It needs to fly off, but it won't be able to fly. The same sense of urgency and safety associated with the discipline of flying airplanes is, by the way, airplanes is, we always talk about 6 Sigma, airline parts and stuff are 9 Sigma. If you think about it, it's almost infinitely perfect.
Wow.
And so I'm thinking, wow, there's all this paper. There's got to be a way to get rid of some of this stuff and make those clinicians on the front line enjoy their job instead of, I said, this poor nurse, I thought, is she like a scribe? Is that all she does for a living? Go look at instruments, get the readings, and scribe them down? That's basically what she was doing most of the time.
When you talk about the importance of airline and medical, it makes me think of the pedestal maybe medicine might be on, because like airlines, if something doesn't show up like that and you're going to have, 300 pissed off people on the flight and they don't understand how the hell is that plane sitting there and we're sitting here and we can't fly it. That's not there in medicine. It was like, well, Dr. So-and-so says this or that, it's all kind of whisper this. And you just can't stand up. Well, you just can't stand up and bitch like you might at the airline person up there. So it leads me to believe that slowness in certain industries can progress without the natural pressure from the customer in solving it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, how many times you've been on an airplane and say, we've got a light indicator on here that says something and we got to send somebody over here to fix it. For all I know, it's most of the time it's just the light bulb's not working. It's not that the wing's going to fall off, but you can't fly it because you got to go check out the light bulb or something. But that's how serious they are. The things that we would allow outside the variance that creep into healthcare, there's just too much variance, and it's just there's too many easy things that pass by that shouldn't. Clinicians, they want it to be right. Everybody wants it to be right, but the system has just created these gaps, is the best I can explain it. And I hope that this, automation or this autonomous pharmacy and just close all those gaps so we don't have to wonder anymore. When you push the button on Amazon and you're pretty sure it's going to show up. It rarely shows up late. It shows up to the right address, and it usually doesn't show up mangled or broken. And that's pretty high reliance. When you push the button, you don't start worrying, well, is it going to show up? Will it show up? Will it be the right part? Will they pick the wrong thing? It tracks it, gives you the information. So you're confident. You're confident about that. And how do we get people confident that the meds that this patient is going to need are going to show up and be ready to administer the right way and everything is right about it?
Yeah.
I think you need that confidence.
I don't want to pick on the doctors or even the medical profession. There's always like, how dare you question me? And then you start throwing, I don't know, sort of like 10 fallacies and arguments that don't hold up. One of them is, you're not the almighty just because you have more things behind your name. An argument's an argument. It's not based on your status and so on. But so long it was like, how dare you question this? And the patients don't question and the lower medical people don't question. And you get this profession of hiddenness. And then it's like you're saying, you don't know, but nobody's stepping into kind of like what the emperor's new clothes kind of thing. I can see how you saw a lot of that when you were with your daughter. How long was it then, Randy, between that and the first dollar you made with Omnicell? What was that stretch?
Yeah, it was only 3 years. I started Sarah was born in 91, and then 93, the company was incorporated, and that was crazy. I got some Stanford engineers and myself. We built the first unit in my garage just as a prototype. We actually rolled it into the ICU at Sequoia Medical in Redwood City, California in 1994, just as a prototype to see how it would work, get the feedback. And I finally said, well, if you like this, will you try it? Which they did. And I said, well, if you like it, would you buy it? And then to my shock, they said yes. So I sold them 3 systems for $331,000. I believe in 1994, and we rolled those things out, and they were happy. They still have them today. Because they were my first customer, I went to their golf. Every hospital has a golf tournament to raise money. So I always go to the golf tournament. It was just 2 weeks ago. I'm not a good golfer, but I'm a good funder of a golf event. We supply about a third of the money for that. Have a good time out there, and it's always good to remember where you came from. Or
absolutely. All right. So Randy, what was that first product? I got to think it's a way to organize the stuff you were seeing. Describe that first product to me. The first machine.
We made it out of aircraft aluminum, so it was this bright, shiny aluminum, which wasn't cheap. Probably one reason it cost so much money. And we got this fancy touch screen that had the light emitters were from behind it. So you put your finger on it, it broke the beams as it was going in. It was the state of the art at the moment, but the thing was so big. And then I put shelves with button underneath each shelf. So the idea was when you need something, you pick it up and hit the button and reorder another one. When we built it, we said, let's make it about this high. It was over 6 feet high, and then we put wheels on it, so it's like 6.5, 7 feet. So these, nurses are all shapes and sizes, but a lot of them said, how do you expect me to get up to that shelf? I'm 6'3", and I said, well, I have no problem getting anything off the shelf. So a little trouble in my research on the size to make it. So that was it.
To choose the product, you broke the thing and the drawer opened or something, and then it reordered it at that time. Was that kind of the idea?
Yeah. So you open the door, and underneath the shelf was a button, and you say, I'm taking 2, so I press 2. That solved the paperwork issue. In other words, if it was a chargeable item, you didn't have to do that anymore. And the biggest thing you worry about as a nurse is, I want to make sure I have enough on the shelf. So if I know that I'm going to touch the shelf, then it's going to be resupplied. And so nurses I kind of knew it was a winner because when nurses, 30 seconds to train them, they were off and running. We didn't need any fancy course on how it worked or how to explain it. We were first going to use red light emitters so that when you put your hand across the shelf, it would show up. Then back then, people thought their hands might be cut off, so we had to go buttons underneath the shelf. But a bunch of Stanford guys, that I was working with, they wanted to, put lasers on it and everything else. But it was a lot of fun.
Wow.
And it was exciting because you'd go in and these nurses would just be happy. And I said, well, why are you happy? He said, well, not, I thought like I had my big survey sheet out, like we did all these surveys, like, well, they must like the color, or they must like this, like that. And it was just real simple. They just said, I just need the meds or supplies that do my job. Can I find them? And is there no administration work? And then I said, well, what about this? He said, I don't care about all that. I need the tools to do my job. Once it protected their tools, it kept other people out of it. It was their supply of resources to help them do their jobs. And that's what they cared the most about. So they really bought into the system and bought into the process.
Talking about the height of things, in our pharmacy, we had this, God bless her, I don't know if she's gone or not yet, but I was a punk, I was a little kid, and she seemed like she was 60. She was probably 25 or 30, but she was sort of a bigger gal. And so she had two things. She wasn't real tall. She couldn't get up too high, but also she had some padding on her, so she couldn't get real low. So everything at our pharmacy was like between knee high and her neck kind of thing. For our listeners, Randy, I mean, some of these, I'm going to call them kids that will listen to this. You don't realize, I mean, I remember in our pharmacy, here's why I remember, we did a big remodel in 96. It was after that, 97, 98. I remember this guy, Chris, came in. He was in computers and things like that. And he was talking about this thing called the web. And I'm like, the web? What is the web? And he's like, well, it's these computers that do, now, Grant, we had computer stuff at our pharmacy since mid 80s. And I'm like, he was telling me about that. I said, well, should I get that address for my pharmacy? And he's like, yeah, I'd get it. You might need it. I don't know if you'll need it, but you might as well get it. That was the mid 90s. Some of the people listening, it's like, well, that stuff's been around forever. They don't know what 91 means for this, but your stuff, it's pre-internet, pre-AOL. It was 5-6 years before the internet came out.
Our server would have to call up each unit like a phone call, and then it would connect like a modem, download the data, and then it would call the next one up. And so you had to keep track of all the data, and the patient information had to flow back and forth. It did a round robin, pulling them all up every 5 minutes to get the latest. There was no like internet plug on them or Ethernet plug or anything like that. So it was pretty basic.
You don't need me though to bump you up, but I gotta tell you, that's advanced. It was another 5-6 years before the AOL disk got sent to everybody. And here you are, not networking, but wiring into these things and getting the modem stuff. I mean, that's very advanced.
I'll tell you the story. We couldn't get the modems to disconnect, connect on a regular basis that eventually not work and jam up. So we hired a bunch of 3 or 4 modem consultants to help us. If we could figure out how to make this work, we're going to do great. I go into the room and I'm looking at these modem consultants working on the modems. Finally, I said, I can tell you the highest paid modem guy in the room. And the chief of engineering looks over at me and he says, how would you know? And I said, well, I can point him out to you. He's right there. And he said, well, how'd you know that? I said, well, he's got hair down to his waist. He can do anything he wants. You've got to be really smart to come into a company and not care how you look and just be brilliant. And he was, which is the other guys. I don't know. I think he fixed our problem. I was really happy about it. I didn't care how long this, but I just wanted to fix my problem. And it was great.
So you get that information. It comes in, I'm guessing it comes into your old IBM. I want to call it not even a 286 wasn't out yet, but something like that. It comes into you. What happens then? I'm trying to think how advanced this was. So it comes to you and then, there weren't APIs back then. I mean, I can't think, how did that get to the wholesaler? What was the connection after you pulled it off? It goes to the modem into your computer. How does that order it?
What we were doing was just providing what did the floor demand need. We need 10 more of these, 5 more of these, 4 more of these. The first one would go to the central B.Ec, which I think you're right. It was probably a 3486. And they'd print out a report and say, this is how much we need. Then they'd go to the shelf and start picking it. At that time, we didn't have inventory software for inside the pharmacy. They'd say, oh, we're low on this. And they'd call the wholesaler and The wholesaler would deliver like 3 times a day, morning, midday, and night. Say, well, tell the wholesaler we need 5 more of these, and they'd show up with 5 more and fulfill whatever they need on the floor on the next run. It was pretty basic, but what was interesting about it is there wasn't a lot of trust between pharmacy and nursing. It was like, we sent it up there. No, you didn't. You should have enough. No, we don't have enough. There was just this reason because of the pressure of the healthcare world to deliver. When we put our system in, we found that it was a peacemaker. Nurses loved it. Pharmacy loved it. And the truth of the information was right there. They weren't late in delivering, and the nurses knew what they had, and they knew what was being used. And so it was kind of a neat thing to see. I remember many days we used to have the customer come visit us, and they'd bring the nursing constituents, and they'd bring the pharmacist in, and they'd always sit on the other side of the table. And you could tell there was some tension there. And then by the end of the day, we'd solve both their problems and they'd be happy. Healthcare is a stressful world, and there's no reason to be stressed. But boy, if you can make at least a few more people happy with the system, it made us happy too.
Randy, I got to pick on doctors again. I can't believe how much I'm picking on doctors because the listeners, if they keep in record, they know I hate attorneys. We got that out of the way many shows ago. I don't usually talk about doctors, but I'm going to now again. But it starts with nurses. These nurses call our pharmacy. And if somebody asks me something, let's say a customer calls me or anybody calls me, hey, Mike, we didn't get this or that from you. Even though I'm 100% sure or 99.9% sure, my conversation is always like, hey, golly, I thought I sent that. Maybe I goofed. I'm pretty sure I did it, but maybe it got lost in cyberspace. So here, I'm going to send it again. And, if you don't see it in 5 minutes, let me know. Something like that. I think that's how most people do it. These nurses, these nurses call up and they're like, we sent this, and this, and that, and it's not there. You guys, and it's like, why the hell does that come from? And I figured it out in my little mind here. I figured it out. It goes back to earlier that we were talking about. I think nurses get that from the doctors. And I can't prove it, but I feel that the doctors talk to the nurses this way, and it's kicking the dog all the way down to the pharmacist. To your point, there's a lot of tension there, and anytime that can get cleared up.
I think part of it is like, I got to get this patient healthy, so the doctor gives the orders, and nurses have got to get this drug to the patient because the doctor said I got to get these drugs to the patient, and they don't have them. And so the urgency is probably around the right place, the doctor. But it creates tension, and it creates tension because you want people to be healed, I think. At least when I'm sitting there next to my daughter, I want her to be healed. That's all I care. Let me push a button and something happen.
I guess that tension has to be absorbed somewhere because when you're sitting there with your daughter, there's tension building up there. And if the tension, I'm blaming the doctors, but if the tension doesn't make it back to the doctor, the nurses are getting it from both ends. And sometimes pharmacy is just a valve to let them out. Now, here's the thing. So you're talking about how this stuff came out and people called the wholesaler up and so on. But the next piece of technology that came out, though, is the handheld ordering machine. And then you would type the right buttons in and you'd have to hold your phone up to it. And they had this fancy rubber thing that would go on the voicing of the phone. And now you're like, that was high tech, man. All the sounds going over this phone.
It was crazy because phone lines in hospitals generally are reliable, but if you lost a phone or someone was cleaning behind the system and decided to unplug some stuff just because they got pulled off the wall. Our favorite one was the server used to sit under the pharmacist's desk and somebody would just turn it off. So we decided we should put that in the IT room eventually.
Yeah, exactly.
But you learn along the way, right? You learn along the way.
What was the coolest or most valuable invention that came out along the run of Omnicell? Not by you guys, but for you guys. For example, there's the internet, bigger storage on a computer, faster computer. Was there anything that helped you guys jump up a little bit, or was the whole thing just a gradual climb?
Well, I'd say the biggest relief was networking in hospitals. When hospitals decided that having a network backbone that was reliable. A lot of people had them, but they weren't mission critical, so they'd fail all the time. So we're trying to put our mission critical equipment on it, and we'd have to send in our IT people to help them fix their network. But once a hospital figured out we've got to have a network, just a ton of issues went away from us. We just put a network card in a computer and a server, and we also had RS-485. Probably nobody out there even knows what that is. It was a little basic, protocol, communication protocol between, you can only put a little data across them, and it wasn't very big, but we were just spending tons of time trying to communicate all over the hospital complex with these systems, because everywhere these systems, you could manage meds or supplies. And when they finally got networks, that helped. And then when they decided that they ought to have an IT room, you got to remember, hospitals didn't even have an IT room back then. And maybe it has telephone equipment in it, or I don't know, a couple of computers to run admissions and a discharge system or something. But it was really pretty basic. A lot of times you weren't struggling to solve an application or to create new software. You were just trying to get the system to work in a very cryptic environment. They had a little network over here, some phones over here. It was always a challenge of the infrastructure. When we got the infrastructure ready and going, that was extremely helpful. And here's one that you probably don't even think of. To me, this helped a ton. Every one of our kiosks or devices that were spread out all over, the hospital might have 1,000 of them or 500 of them. They all had these miniature spinning disk drives. You know what a disk drive is? It spins around. Eventually, we said, look, when you got 1,000 of them, they're just going to break every now and then. It's just not that reliable of a device because they're spinning, they're on 24/7, there's heat, there's all this kind of stuff. Then they finally came out with solid state disk drives. You pull out that spinning disk drive and you throw in solid state, boom, you don't have any disk drive failures anymore. And that was a really cool thing to come along and help us. I think eventually the cloud is going to be next, because we're just creeping into the cloud. But cloud is what? Unlimited compute power, unlimited storage power, almost unlimited bandwidth. So you can solve problems you've never been able to solve, AI and stuff like that. It just allows you to do things. You can't put enough memory on a computer to solve all those things. All of these cloud companies have figured that out. And now the cloud is expensive. It used to be cheap, and now the AI is sucking up all the space out of the clouds, and it's making, you go to Amazon or Google and say, I want to borrow some of your cloud space, and think, wow, that's pretty expensive. Maybe I ought to go build my own cloud for that amount. So anyway, that's kind of what's going on out there today. It's pretty dynamic.
The cloud, I think a lot of people, I know I do, because first of all, I'm glad stuff is in the cloud, because that network stuff's a pain in the ass. I still don't get it. All the Windows crap, that's hard to do. I still don't get that. The cloud, though, because none of it's seen, you think like the cloud is like a cloud. You think it's just like molecules just up there. And AI now, I know I was listening to ChatGPT, what's his name, but they were saying that part of their reason they can't grow as fast as they want to is just a limit on the cloud. We don't see it, but it truly is like just a crap load of computers and cords across the Pacific. It's a very tangible, physical thing, but not for the average person. For us, it's just Wi-Fi,
Exactly. People think because it's in a cloud, it must be unsecure because it's floating up there. But because I've got unlimited compute power, I can make it unlimited secure. I can't do that on a server. I only have a limit. Do you ever think of autonomous cars? Like, what is that going to do for us? If I don't have to get in the car and drive anymore, and if I don't have to worry about getting in an accident or watching the road, I can sit there and play cards or do anything I want. But it's all being run by the cloud. Like something called the cloud is helping this car run down the road so that it doesn't run into anything. It gets me from point A to point B. But at some point, you have to trust that the car and the cloud are going to get you there and not jail. I guess we do it when we get on an airplane, but being in your own car, you ever think about that, Mike? Being in your own car, like, hey, is this thing going to give me?
If you ask the average person, what percentile of driver are you as far as safety and respect for other drivers and keeping a cool head and things like that?
Yeah.
100% of the people think they're in the top 25 percentile. It's mathematically impossible. So I proudly carry the flag of being in the lower 50%. I maybe could rise up if I paid attention more and wasn't goofing around or daydreaming. I might even be in the bottom 25%. People say, you trust the autonomous stuff? It's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I can have 20 cameras on my car that the speed is 10 times or whatever faster than my nerve cells are. And you think I'm going to do better than that? Of course I want autonomy. My daughter lives in Raleigh, North Carolina, so it's 12 hours away. And I talk about this all the time. I think about, Randy, just like you're saying, I think about, going out at 9 o'clock in the evening with my wife, and we get out there and we sit down, put a movie in, pop some popcorn in this pod, fall asleep at midnight, and we wake up in her driveway at 9 the next morning.
Exactly.
But here's the thing, Randy, I guess the computers will be able to do a good job defensively, but I think there's always going to be people behind the wheel of their own car, because you don't really think that, but it's like, well, when would 100% of the people not want to give up driving?
As long as you have one human being out there with the steering wheel, anything can happen. There's always that wild one. I think there's 7 levels of an autonomous driving to go up. And the 7th one is when they get rid of the steering wheel. So you're saying we're going to be stuck at 6 because the steering wheel is going to still be there. I don't know if I've tried to put my car in autonomous driving or whatever it is, more automated driving. And it's scary to let go. The thing decides it's going to change lanes. I said, wait a minute, I hadn't checked all the mirrors. I'm not sure I want to change lanes. So you've got to get to the point where you can let go. Otherwise, you can't be autonomous. Otherwise, you're fighting the automation.
You bring up a point there about the steering wheel, because I'm thinking of these Mustangs out there. Those have wheels, and who's going to give that up? It seems like for the next 100 years, you're still going to be seeing 67 Mustangs driving around. Eventually, those all go away, and maybe there's some law that says you can't have steering wheels or something like that. I just don't see how that changeover will happen. I guess the computers will be smart enough to handle the few people still with steering wheels.
Or maybe they had to put the retrofit car on, like Back to the Future, the guy had to put a retrofit thing on or something. You can still ride your Mustang, but you got to put the automated retrofit on the kit or something.
Randy, the scary thing about that, though, is you and I are roughly the same generation. I'm only 58, but I had my first child in 1992. So
you haven't asked me about my kids yet. You only need to ask one question about kids.
What's that?
How many kids do I have?
You got 5.
No, that was just the 5th kid. It was where I started Omnicell. I had 5 more after her.
How many kids do you have?
I got 10.
I got 10 kids also.
You do not, Mike.
I do.
Really?
Yeah. Kevin, Megan, Molly, Brian, Aiden, Grace, Lance, Hallie, Abby, Drew.
Let's see, my 10th child is in Michigan State right now.
Is that right?
Engineering, of course. Oldest is 40 and 1 and 2 years apart until you get to the 9th one, and then it's 5 years apart.
And we got 5 girls and 5 boys. What's your spread?
7 boys and 3 girls.
I've got 10 kids. My wife says she has 11. I'm not sure how that works out. So our ages are 32 down to 14.
You're young. You're really young.
I don't know.
I'm proud of you.
Back on autonomy. Some people will say, I always want a computer in charge of my jet because it's never going to go past 30 degrees. That saves you from a suicidal pilot. And some people say, no, I understand that, but I want my pilot, if something goes haywire, I want them to be able to do something like this. All right, so driving, flight. With your stuff, you being the pioneer in this, we got to ask about pharmacy, autonomy.
Yeah.
How much of that can be autonomous, and where does the discussion lie as far as how much human intervention in the autonomy?
Yeah, that's a great question. 5 years ago, I stood up in front of the Hospital Association and talked about the vision of the autonomous pharmacy. And I figured if I was still alive at the end of the show, we'd still be in business. But it was an aspirational. And so it's not an Omnicell movement. It's really an industry movement. And we said, well, can the industry understand this? Or do they even want this? It's really not about replacing pharmacy work. It's about giving the pharmacy work back to the pharmacist and having all the logistical work done by robots and software. So we asked if this is possible to the industry, what does it mean? They went out and worked on it. Like we talked about, autonomous cars have 7 levels to get to autonomous driving. These guys, being pharmacists, they're more concise. They came out with 5 levels in order to get to the autonomous pharmacy. But more importantly, what do you get when you get to the autonomous pharmacy? What does that look like? The industry group we put together, so it's really easy. It's like 0 errors. You're going to have no errors. So it's pretty aspirational, but 0 errors. Maybe you think of 0 car accidents if you're driving a car. 0 waste. We waste a lot of money and medications because they expire on the shelf or we position them wrong or don't have them the right way. And then this next one is 0 human touches. I think what they mean by that is we're just trying to pick something off the shelf, make sure we have the right one. If human beings do it, occasionally you're going to pick the right one. If a robot does one, and by the way, it's just a barcode reading, it weighs it, does visual systems. There's like 5 different ways to check it to make sure you have the right one. So there are 3 zeros: 0 medication errors, 0 medication waste, and 0 human touches. There's 3 100%. 100% regulatory compliance, because these poor pharmacists, I don't know, healthcare is just a big compliance thing, right? So got to keep up with that. 100% data and inventory visibility. This we realized was harder than we thought, because you basically have to light up meds wherever they are. They could be at home, in transport, in a clinic, in a pharmacy. They could be anywhere. And so that's one of the ones we think a lot about is how do you light up these dark areas so you can figure out where medication is. And this is really for the pharmacy. If you're successful with autonomous pharmacy, then you should be able to say that there's 100% time spent on clinical activities for the pharmacist. In other words, can you imagine you're in your pharmacy and you never look behind you to see what's in the inventory or on the shelves, and someone walks up and says, I need this. Yeah, I got it. It just plops in front of you. You don't even have to think whether you have it. You know you're going to have it. So I think it's pretty aspirational, but there are discrete steps. I think in 5 to 7 years, we can get 95% of this. We can get really close.
What do the naysayers say? The same people that say they're never going to trust autonomous driving, what do they say about automation?
They're saying, are we killing jobs in some sort? Not necessarily pharmacists, but pharmacy techs. But I'd say pharmacy techs are hard to fill. And I'd also say that we really need pharmacy techs for the higher end stuff like mixing, compounding, and stuff like that. I'm not sure there's a lot of value add in going to shelves and picking stuff, sorting through things in life. And so I don't feel too bad about that one. People say it could cost a lot of money. And I said, well, I think we're wasting a lot of money, and we need to say that these systems could cost a lot of money, but until you know how much money you're going to save, they're limited resources. If you want to make sure everybody gets medications that they need, irrespective of their ability to pay, you've got to be really, tight with your resources. You can't do that with human beings. You got to automate that piece. A lot of people say, well, it's great vision, Randy, but healthcare moves, a little bit at a time. It's not going to move there very quickly. It's my nutty vision, 5 to 7 years. What did Bill Gates say? Not much changes in 2 years, but in 10 years, amount of things changes. And so it's about to be 5 years or 10 years since this autonomous pharmacy movement started. And I think we're going to get there.
That's very intriguing. I know you hear about job stuff, but it's like if one company does it well, takes away others' jobs, let's say Amazon Pharmacy. If you get one pharmacy that does a good job of autonomy, not only is your job gone. The whole industry can be gone if other people don't catch up. So you have to move forward as the industry. If it's going to happen in one place, it's got to happen every place. So I think it's right on, and it's right on.
Any pharmacy should be able to compete with Amazon or anybody else if they have the tools. It's not like they have the market locked on tools. And you can get natural language communications. You can get a lot of different things right off the shelf and plug it in. I think the edge for the independent pharmacies is you're still there. You're the person. I think we all have a tendency to want to deal with people, not entities.
Except me and that lady across the counter.
Just put a sign up in your store. We only take nice people. We're not the insurance company or something like that.
Randy, the key to this is if it's going this way, you're giving people the tools to do this in their pharmacy. Where do people see some of those tools? Give us your website, I suppose, is the best place for them to check it out.
Certainly at Omnicell.com, we have a lot of tools for both independent pharmacies and obviously big providers. If you think about all the things you're trying to accomplish, we're trying to find the biggest pain points you have at the moment and make them easy, like our IBR, our interactive voice, using natural language instead of the call going to a pharmacist to have to actually, is my script refill ready? It says, you're probably calling about this refill. We will let you know it's all ready. Is that what you needed to know? Yes, it is. Great. Well, then come by and pick it up or we can deliver it for you. We found that about 90% of the people who call a pharmacy hit the button to talk to a pharmacist or tech. And you put this software in and it cuts it down to 70%. You lose 25% of these calls that can just naturally be answered. It's really cool to see those kinds of things help out pharmacists.
Golly, Randy, thanks for joining us. I can see why you're a longstanding CEO, outlasting the average of 5 to 7 years with your time in the saddle. Keep it up. It's fun to watch you guys. I know you have a lot going on, so I appreciate your time. Our listeners appreciate it and look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you, Mike. I really had a blast, and I hope you'll invite me back. I don't think I've had such fun in a long time. Let's hang out together sometime. Take care, man.
You've been listening to the Business of Pharmacy podcast with me, your host, Mike Kelzer. Please subscribe for all future episodes.